welcome to episode 228 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian wrapping up my 16th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Fallon and Rochelle in Kansas, Steve in New Jersey, and Shelley in Texas. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter, my handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Friends, be sure to listen to episode 224 if you haven't. I announced a brand new sponsorship this past May with Literati Book Fairs. And now is a chance to hear from one of Literati's team members, Carissa. Carissa, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Would you remind listeners, Carissa, what do you do at Literati?
So I'm the creative director here at Literati. I oversee the brand vision and creative direction for all of our branded content and customer-facing marketing materials.
I am so grateful there's somebody like you at Literati because this is absolutely not my area of expertise. But when it comes to advertising a book fair that's coming up, I know I used to get very worked up. I am no marketing expert. And what I don't want to do is waste my time advertising for something if I don't have to. Can you give the listeners an idea of what does Literati do for the librarians who sign up for a book fair? What kind of marketing materials come in anticipation of a book fair? And what would a librarian expect if they were going to be hosting a book fair with Literati?
Sure. Yeah. So we try to provide everything that the librarian could ever need to promote their fair. So we provide a whole suite of marketing assets, from all of the promotional printed assets that get sent directly to every school that comes in a box, and it includes several posters, featured book flyers, bookmarks, outdoor signage, and even things like letters and flyers to send home to the parents to let them know about the upcoming fair. And then we also include a whole host of digital download materials, like really fun promotional videos that we have book trailers for every book, and also longer videos for the different age ranges. We have several social media assets that librarians can download if their schools are on social. We have email templates and all sorts of newsletter graphics that librarians can download to help include it in their existing school newsletters. Also things that they can put on their school's website. We even have things like classroom activity sheets that tie into the fair that we can pass out to teachers, or you can pass them out in the library. So it really helps kids to get amped up about the upcoming fair. And then we actually also have an online interface that we call Open Book, and that gives librarians full access to all sorts of really helpful articles and how-to videos on how to run as successful as fairs as possible. So we kind of try to cover everything, and we're always looking into all of our surveys and customer feedback to learn what is it that librarians are really looking for, and we try to create those assets.
Oh, fantastic. Well, and don't be surprised if one of my listeners reaches out with an advice, because librarians are generally people who really want to, we found that if we say something, we generally get a good response. So don't be surprised if a listener sends a request through me. So Carissa, thank you so much, because I'll tell you what, I would worry a lot less if I knew that box was coming. And it means that I don't have to do all that work. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you, Amy.
Friends, be sure to tune in and learn all about Literati and their generous offer. Listeners who book their first Literati Book Fair before July 31st for this upcoming fall and mention the code UNITED will receive a $500 gift card from Titlewave. As always, there's a link in today's show notes. And now a word from our sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. I am grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 5. They are offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for our episode, Restarting a Library, and my conversation with Sam Carterby. Friends, I am so excited. Sam Carterby, welcome back to the podcast.
Sure, I'm happy that you invited me.
You know, Sam, you and I crossed paths back in November, and it was really a fun episode because I don't know what possessed you, but I had 9 volunteers to be part of the episode 202, Renovations, Experts Chime In. It was a mega episode. We've never done anything like it. And you and 8 other librarians, school librarians, shared your strategies for surviving a library renovation. But let me just ask, you could have just listened to the episode. You didn't have to chime in. What motivated you to say, no, I want to be a part of this?
In November of last year, I was currently standing in a library that I had, and by the way, don't do this, volunteered time to put all of the books on the shelves. And I think we talked about that in November because I wanted the library to open for the kids fresh. However, we were still, at that time, we were in what I referred to consistently as #supply chain issues. And that meant that my tables and things were very far from having arrived, or they were arriving piecemeal. So in November, I had nice books, but I had little to no furniture in the room, which, in collective rooms like libraries, you use the furniture to direct traffic. So I was creatively directing traffic, but I had no furniture to encourage the children what to do in the sections. So living through a remodel was currently the primary focus of my life in November. So when you said that was what you were going to do, I was like, oh, that's me.
Well, and friends, we all sort of contextualize the conversations that we hear in the podcast episodes to our own personal circumstance. And so while it's possible that there isn't anybody who listened to experience those same set of circumstances, definitely people who have faced some of the struggles that you have and done so in a way that you've made sure that your students are still being supported as best as we can under those given circumstances. I feel like everything we do is parentheses under the given circumstances, and I think that we have to always keep that in mind. Remind listeners who haven't listened to you before, tell us where in the country you are. Tell us about the place where you currently work, your library, and the grades that you support. That'll help us understand better about what we're talking about today.
Sure. I am in Eastern Washington. And for just one myth-busting moment, that section of Washington looks nothing like Seattle. Instead of being the wet, cloudy land that some of our listeners might be imagining, that is not us. We are very much high desert, shrub steppe area. It's very hot. It's very dry. There's sagebrush. I drive about 30 minutes from my house to the apple orchards. And my school is 95% maybe Hispanic identifying families, and maybe a third of us are monolingual Spanish. I tell that teacher that I am tragically monolingual and not in the cool way. because she has to send her students with a buddy when they come in. Although in the 2 years I've been there, the students and I are kind of on equal footing. We can kind of stammer towards each other and gesture and get our ideas across now, because I have picked up just enough Spanish to be able to cope. But it's better if they come with a buddy.
So what are the ages of your students?
Oh, so sorry. I serve 6th grade to 8th grade.
Well, and it wouldn't be a bad idea, because I remember using a lot of visual signs, a lot of colorful images in my collection, because I had pre-readers and new readers and readers who were just getting their footing. But it seems like you could possibly adapt your signage to also include images to give a certain sense of guidance to all of your readers who are navigating your space.
100%. We do use visuals. Later, I'll talk about the new signage that we just built. The problems that I have is explaining what's going on the computer that they think is an error in their student device, or maybe they want a particular kind of book. And I do have books in Spanish, but to do that same reader's advisory in Spanish is hard, because I don't have enough of a vocabulary to make that happen. Those are the reasons that I need a buddy. But the regular stuff is kind of okay. I use Google Translate a lot.
That's fantastic. And, I have to imagine that it makes a great deal of sense, especially with middle grade readers, to bulk up your graphic novels, and get a lot of those visual cues to help a lot of your readers along.
Exactly.
When it comes to enjoying their books. I think that's something that a lot of us have resorted to in terms of saying, hey, we just need to build out this graphic novel collection as one of the things that we do to support our readers. So, given the topic of today's conversation, the restarting of a library, is this the library that you currently happen to work in right now?
Yes. This library was shuttered for, I think, 16 years, but the rumor mill tells me 12. But when you're playing around in the back of Destiny, it looks like 16. So I don't understand the time difference between the rumor mill and Destiny, but perhaps she knew she was going to retire, so she started ramping down. I don't know. But during that time, it was the storage space. It was the place that they did everything that didn't have another place in the school. And, the library already is that kind of a place, even when it's functional. But when the primary purpose for that room shifted, so did the feeling.
So, yeah, the whole catch-all, we tend to, we're the catch-all. It's this idea of communal space. As I tell many people who I encounter in my job, we're sort of the school's family room.
Yes.
This is where everything happens. And that's exactly a good thing. And it can be a challenge. It can create its own set of circumstances that we do sort of, as invested as we are in this space, we also have to have some of that detachment that allows us to be okay coming in after knowing you have no idea who was in that space last night, what group was there after school. You know what? You have to let it go. Just let it go, because this is our library. This is our learning commons. This has not been my space ever. So
yes, I have rotating slides up that state the expectations and say what Mrs. Librarian is reading and all kinds of things like that. One of those slides reminds the kids, myself, and the admin that this library is yours. And every once in a while I look up there and I think, yes, that is the point. This library is yours. It is not mine. It is yours.
I have sometimes referred to myself as the caretaker, just the caretaker of this space. And I'm still very grateful for it. But I want to dig into this idea. You said that your space was dormant. Forgive me. I just am curious, what were you in this building while it was in this dormant period, or were you in a different building, different district, different occupation? Where were you when this library was not being used?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I came to librarianship late. First, I was a business owner and I was in the business realm. Then I wanted a life change. So I went to be a para. My kids were teenagers. I needed something that I could just go home from at night. While I was a para, I was working in the library. And that was great. And I loved it. And I was good at it. And I was networking with the teachers and the librarian said, you should really get your teacher cert and then you could be a librarian. And I was like, oh, that's so funny. I mean, if I got my teacher cert, it would be forever until I became a librarian. But I did it anyway. And I got my teacher cert. And then lo and behold, my first post is this middle school library, which was wonderful.
So your experience as a para and being in a school library was not this building. It was
oh heavens,
yeah.
No.
So it was your
no, it was elementary.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, but again, we sort of want to appreciate you coming to this space. So you've only been there for a couple of years?
Yes, I am about to conclude my second year.
Okay. So this is really key. So when you were hired, they said, here's your space. And you said, oh my. Now, friends, while I have not been in Sam's library, I have pictures, and I want to encourage you to take a look at the images which Sam has shared with us in a presentation that you can find in our show notes. And, I think this is fantastic because you got hired, you hadn't been a teacher in that building. So you could not have known what the culture or the climate was prior to your arrival. You have to sort of suss it out and figure out, and you're learning as you go along, what people had expected of that space prior to you getting there.
100%. Yeah. And like any other corner of the school, there were a lot of people who had a lot of expectations about that space. And you don't get an informative handout about that. So there was a lot of learning on the streets that had to happen. I can say that the kids are very happy with the new space.
Well, and this sounds, just the idea, they opened the door and this was a space that had not been utilized in years. Certainly not as a library. Sam, I'm getting the sense your library, when you walk in, at that time was glorified storage space. Many listeners can relate to this because at least in 2020, many of our spaces were repurposed either as extended learning spaces because the student seating needed to be sort of spread out. I heard that consistently during the pandemic. Many librarians said, my space is, we're storing stuff and it's being used as an additional classroom because we've got to move the kids further apart when we're there and we're not circulating the books, certainly not in the way that we used to. And this really is something that's hard to come back from, especially if you didn't have somebody like yourself, a librarian, who is going to be advocating for this space.
Agreed. When I walked in, that is very much what I saw. And when I walked in, it was post-COVID. So in addition to what had been happening, for the rest of the 14 years, all of COVID had transpired. Thankfully, the assistant principal at the time did the furniture ordering for me, which I talked about in the November show, because to do the book order, learn the community, and do the furniture order, I don't know a human who could do that effectively. That's a lot going on all at once.
Especially during your first year.
Exactly. So I was very thankful that Demko and she put together my furniture order. So thank you to those two people. The furniture is lovely. The 12,000 new books that we got brought my collection from an average date of 1980 to, I just checked in preparation for this, 2023 to 2011, which is not that bad when you figure that when I put in a series, I had to ensure that book number 1 is represented. So book number 1 of many series is going to be years before 2023. While I was doing the massive weed that I needed to do to make sure that we could be ready to put all these new books up, I was pulling out books from 1960, 1968, books where Kennedy was still alive.
Well, and forgive me, but it is so much easier to weed a collection for which you had no role in building. Like that's my favorite. That's my absolute favorite. I'm like, you know what? I did that for 2 libraries during 2020. I went in there and the previous librarian had run those collections for 15 years. And I went in there and I was brutal. And it was the best because I didn't buy any of those books. I didn't care. I was like, get rid of it. It's nice to have that detachment. And you do feel terrible when you have to, weed books and you remember hemming and hawing and buying those books and maybe they didn't circulate or I don't know. But boy, when you walk into somebody else's space, you're like, oh, this is going to be fun. And I'm glad that you got that average age from the beginning. I did that. I think regardless of what the state of the library is when you take over, your best bet is to get a couple things. And this is vital. Get that before picture. Take some before video. Take some before pictures. And because you will never appreciate, you'll forget because you're in that space day in and day out. You'll forget the transformative power that we have if you don't have proof. And so I took some video of the first day I walked into my space, and I briefly worked with a library assistant. And obviously the person hadn't been there from the beginning. And I said, I just want to show you some pictures of what this place looked like. I showed him the video. And he's like, this is unrecognizable. I'm like, I know. The average age of my collection is 2002. And I just got 2 grants. And the average age of my purchases was 2019. And I can't wait for all those books to arrive because it's going to be absolutely just like turning it's going to be unrecognizable. So I'm very, very excited. But Sam, tell me, you got hired, and I'm assuming you had an opportunity to see the space before you accepted the job?
I saw the space after I accepted the job.
And did this come out in the interview that you would be restarting a library?
100%. While I was in the elementary school library world, we had closed one older building and moved to one newer building. So as they were discussing restarting a library, which was not withheld, I had not restarted a library, but I had moved a library, which is going to involve a lot of the same things. It's different, but there are some major similarities, like, knowing to pack the box in shelf order, right? And that did help me. But restarting a library, that is a big job.
I want to make it clear, though, you were hired with the understanding that you would be restarting a space for which it had not been currently used as a library space. In other words, you have the support of your administration.
During the interview, I was made well aware that we were restarting a space. Yes.
And I know I'm not alone in making this observation, but how many of us have worked in schools that were clearly not designed with teachers in mind? Or clearly, and again, these were designed by very well-intentioned architects, but I'll tell you what, in 1936, nobody was asking educators what would be the best configuration for a school. And so many of my buildings were built in the 1930s. But even the buildings I work at, like the building I work in right now, you sort of scratch your head and say, I'm sorry, did you not talk to an educator before you came up with this plan? Because this is, you're creating a whole bunch of headaches, whether it comes to supervision, student safety. Really, those are the biggies, like student supervision and safety. clearly not something that they thought about when they designed our spaces. But I remember going through I did a walkthrough before I accepted the job, and it was a very helpful thing to do. But I do remember asking on my tour, I'm like, so how much of this space am I in charge of? Because some of it was literally over my head. And I'm, friends, I know this is a podcast, but I'm putting my hands over my head because it was a balcony. And there was this workspace over the balcony. And they're like, oh, no, you're not in charge of that space. I'm like, good, because I cannot see up there. And it does make me worried. But it sounds like you had an opportunity to sort of think about all of the things. And it sounds like they wanted to support you because I'm guessing your space didn't have a budget the year prior to you getting there.
No, because we were post-COVID, I'm sure that the money was ESSER money. I was told that the money was what they didn't have to spend on the copy budget, but that doesn't really track to the right amount of money. But ESSER money does track to the right amount of money. And that's fine. That's a good use of ESSER money to recoup learning loss. A library is an excellent venture to restart. So my restarting budget was not small, and I was truly thankful for that. As I said, I got furniture and 12,000 new books. I'm sure it's not the biggest budget out there, but it was not small. And I would not have been able to do what we did without the generous budget that the school board gave us. There was not a clear understanding, though, that budget continued. So the very first thing that I did, it's not the very first thing. In the summer, after I had survived my first year and was no longer a first-year teacher, I reached out to the State Library Association, who was wonderfully swift in giving me the typical school schedule. And that includes a ratio, this many FTE times this many dollars, and that's the earmark for the library. It's important to understand for our listeners that earmark doesn't mean that that's your budget. It just means that that's what the state gives you in hopes that you're going to have a budget for your library. So a certain amount of the budget that the district gives to every school is at the principal's discretion. So I nicely told everybody about the ratio for the first couple of months of that second year, and then casually ordered some, not many, because I had just gotten 12,000 new books, casually ordered some new books. And I was very happy when my casual orders were approved. So things have changed.
It's always curious, especially if you come into a situation like a new library for you, the first question you should be wondering is, what was the budget last year? But you didn't have a last year's budget because the space wasn't functioning. So how does that get reconciled?
Good question. So when I knew that I was hired, but I hadn't started yet, like many other new librarians, I hope, I did nothing but listen to your podcast like all day, every day. And you continually said, ask what your budget is, ask what your budget is, ask what your budget is. And I run into you in the librarian Facebook places where everybody says, ask what your budget is. So I can't remember if I did this my first year. I very much doubt that I did, for two reasons. It was clear that money was raining from the sky and I needed to be grateful. And I was a first-year teacher, and you have to be careful how you roll the dice. So I know that heading into the second year, which is the year we are currently standing in, I reached out to WLA and asked what the budget is. They give it to you in a formula. This many FTEs times this many dollars equals this much. Again, that's earmarks. So I was very careful that when anybody asked me that question, I first thanked the school board for the graciousness, and then second, recited the ratio. I didn't ever try to use up that whole ratio this year. I still do not know if destiny comes out of that ratio. But also in that discussion, I tried to make clear that ratio, at least in my state, does not include tech. So it's not the devices, even though we do check them in and out. That is its own ratio to which I was not speaking. I'm not prepared to speak to that ratio.
Well, and I think something that you remind me is that oftentimes when we're talking about money, funding, you dance a very fine line, because on the one hand, you don't want to show your cards. You don't want to, and this is where I think we really, as educators, and many of us have been teachers, this is where we absolutely do not have any prior experience. And that is dealing with a budget. And it really sort of sets us apart as educators in the building, because in most cases, our spaces have something that we are allowed to spend to support the space that we are overseeing. And it's up to our administrators to decide what that is. And on the one hand, you want to come forward with ideas because you want to look intentional. You want to look, I have plans. These are the things I would like to do. This is my vision. And yet you also want to make sure that you don't cut off any opportunities that your administration might have. You don't want to sell yourself short. You don't want to make sure that you don't want to I'm lacking the word, but you don't want to allow them the opportunity to give you less than what they had intentionally planned on giving you when it comes to money. And I'll be honest, I have found that oftentimes I'm keeping very quiet because I'm listening to hear, trying to get a sense of the vibe, like what kinds of situation are we talking about when it comes to money? Because I absolutely don't ever want somebody to decide I shouldn't get all that they had earmarked for our space. So, and I think that that's something that with the additional years, as you get more comfortable in your space and with your administration, that should hopefully work itself out.
And as my collection gets older, because right now, we literally just took the saran wrap off the collection in August, right before the students came in. So as I'm ordering more Heartstoppers, as I'm ordering not the Scholastic Dogmans, but the Bound to Stay Bound Dogmans, I'm improving the collection, but I have to be careful because everyone knows that arrived in boxes at the beginning of the year. So it is already new. First, I can't imply that I don't have the appropriate things in the collection because, I built that collection. But also I had to make sure that I was only ordering one, tops two copies of things in that order. But when the hold list is hugely long for all the Heartstoppers, I can use that data to ask for new Heartstoppers. And then I didn't always ask for the Follett bound or the Bound to Stay Bound copy of Heartstopper, because as you and our listeners know, later we might not need 3 deep on all of the issues. But right now, I needed 3 deep on all of the issues.
I love that your decisions are data-driven. Administrators are going to be far more likely to support the requests that we come to bring them when we have that data to support it. I've heard from a couple librarians this strategy where, you purchase 2 copies in hardcover, but then you might, build up some of your collection with paperback equivalents to address sort of that immediate sort of surge of interest that you have in certain titles, but with the understanding that at some point when those paperbacks sort of fall apart as they do or disappear as they do, and they become to a point where they really should not be circulated anymore. I know some librarians give those books away to the kids, or they say, hey, listen, this is a tired copy. I'm just going to give this to you. I'm going to take it out of our collection. Make sure they see you take it out of the collection. But I know that we've done that sometimes with our really tired copies if we're not replacing them. But if you have 2 hard copies, those paperback copies can be, sort of as they fall apart, and they just don't stand the test of time. But you also find, I remember at one point I bought 10 copies of every Dogman when it came out. I bought 10 copies of every Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And we certainly don't need to do that. 14 years later, with Diary of a Wimpy Kid, that was my first year of being a librarian, I will say. And I got to the point where I was buying 10 of each book. And at some point, you're not going to be replacing 10 copies with 10 copies.
Yes. And it doesn't matter how many copies you have. They're not going to stay on your shelf anyway. You're still going to have 0 on your shelf. You're never going to win that. But the district, during the downtime in our library, had moved to the lifestyle where all of the books coming in are from Book Fair. So even when I had a hard copy of Dogman, it was a Book Fair copy of Dogman, and your listeners realize the difference between the Bound to Stay Bound and the Follett Bound and Scholastic. So one thing I was trying to do was teach the administration that A, I could do data-driven orders. B, I can use holds for that. That's what I did with the Heartstoppers. And C, that just because it has a hardback, not all hardbacks are created the same. And hardbacks are the appropriate hardbacks are a much better use of our dollars than any of the other ways that you could get it through Book Fair. Book Fair is not a terrible thing. I was just using it combined with the ratio of dollars to advocate for my space carefully.
I had a volunteer helping me input the price of each copy of the books I had just recently purchased. An order had arrived. And I said, listen, do you mind sitting and just doing some data entry? We've got to enter the price of the book into my catalog. And this was a non-librarian, and she's a lovely person, and she covers my library when I'm at meetings and such. And she said, this is such an expensive book. And it was Follett bound. And I said, well, it's actually not that much more expensive than a paperback. The difference is a paperback's going to die an ugly death in a year. And this one, so long as somebody doesn't lose it, will be around 10 years from now. And that's an investment, because when you buy something that's $12 and it's destroyed the first year you might check it out. I might check it out to 2 people. It lives in their backpack for weeks and weeks and weeks, comes out, it looks like it's been through a war zone. But I spend $21 and I've got something that's going to last for years. So it's an investment. I tell people it's an investment, and it's worth spending this kind of money, because I need this collection to support not just this year's group of students, but next year and then next year and then next year. So, I'm curious, because you came into this space, you've talked a lot about building out your collection. And when it comes to, and this is something that makes me nervous, is that whenever one of our spaces goes dormant, it is not unusual for the building to get accustomed to using that space in a way that it wasn't intended. I'll use an example of a library that I had years ago. I came into it, and somebody had erected a partition that stood these were 15 feet tall ceilings, but the partition went up to about 7 feet. And what somebody had done is subdivide the space and created a computer lab. And I was like, wait, was this always like that? They're like, no. We just moved all your bookshelves closer together. And any librarian will tell you, if you move the bookshelves closer together, you're not doing a darn thing for the access. The student access, when we've got littles colliding with one another because one's looking at one side of the bookshelves and the other one's looking at the other side of the bookshelves, and they're backing up to one another, that's no good. And, but we had lost a third of our space because somebody had decided there was a need. In this case, it was creating another computer lab. And this was obviously before Chromebooks became the norm. And so they had taken a third of my space and turned it into a computer lab, which is devastating. And they're like, oh, but all we did was move your shelves together a little bit closer. And I'm like, no. But I'm thinking about your space, because it went for so long without being used as a library. It became, somebody else's idea of what it should be. And so how did you start to reclaim that? Because obviously you don't want to worry anybody by just pitching everything. It sounds to me like you probably, did you try to find the original owners of some of the things. Our spaces are time capsules. And it sounds like other people were able to store things in your library space?
Let me start at the beginning. So my space is probably, I don't exactly know when it was built, but it gives the aura of a 1975 build, 1980 build. So we have the central library. We have used to be the National Geographic room, right? But now that's the computer lab for the CTE course. And then we have used to be the computer lab when everybody would come in and work on site. But now that's the SEL room. And those are perfectly valiant adventures to be on, but they are now no longer library space. Then on the other side, we have the circ desk. And beyond that, we have what would normally be the librarian's office so that you could use your prep time accordingly and store your stuff. That is an office for somebody else. And then when I arrived, the workroom was an office for somebody yet else. And I was told that I only had the circ desk and that I had to run the makerspace. Thankfully, the person who had been in the workroom did me the kindness as a new teacher of finding another spot to be, thankfully. I appreciate him very much. And that allowed me a place to store the computers and a place to put the computers over the summer. There were bookends and the really old plastic Demco dividers that would go between nonfiction, but plastic has a shelf life. It doesn't last forever. And the plastic, I was able to convince the para who came with the room that the plastic was brittle. I demonstrated how easily it snaps. And if you were going to put that in between the nonfiction books, the books are just going to break it. There's no point in trying to keep up with that system anymore. The librarian before me had superb book repair skills. Book repair skills I will never fully understand. Like yards and yards of the burlap that you create a book cover with. No, I will never make it to that level of skill.
No. Okay. All right. This is generationally. I know. And you know what? I have seen some YouTube videos where something like that was done. And, but I'll tell you what, and everybody I've talked to, when it comes to book repair, beyond some very basic taping and gluing of spines, I am not reconstructing anything. My time is more valuable and the book's not that expensive. And, I can get the visual already. So,
and she had the pens from before we had spine labels, the pens where you wrote in your library handwriting on the spine. It was that era. Speaking of time capsules, it was amazing, but that isn't how the world works. So as I was disposing of it, I was educating the para. Oh, this is what this is for, but we don't live in that time. Now I don't have to carve that into the spine that I have myself built. We can order them from Bound to Stay Bound and we can make a spine label.
But Sam, appreciate that generations ago, the librarians would not have been collecting their Chromebooks. The librarians would not have been in charge of device distribution and getting those all back and then billing the families and so forth. There were so many different, different responsibilities pre-automation. I know that my high school library had 3 librarians because there was nothing that was automated when I was in high school. So you had somebody who expressly worked with and exclusively worked with the catalog because it was completely generated by hand. I mean, those cards. And friends, I got to tell you, I have sent out more than almost 500 sort of little note cards to listeners with the podcast sticker. And if you've gotten a letter from me, it was in a little book pocket with one of those book card, sort of those little index cards, the little checkout cards. I don't even know what they're called because I've never been a librarian when we use them. But I will tell you what, if you've ever gotten stationery from me, I'm going to tell you the first 4 years, really through 2022, I was using things I had simply brought home from that time capsule library that I had inherited. Because in every workroom that I walked into, they had huge long boxes of those book pockets and those checkout cards that you would slip down into them. And I'm like, I just quietly said, is anybody using these? And they're like, no. Oh, good. I'm taking them home. And I upcycled every single one I could get my hands on. I think I have had to break down now. This is year 5, and I've had to break down and start buying them from I found a distributor on Amazon, but whatever.
The book pocket system was still in the books that were sitting in the library because, First Book is an entity that Title I schools can get books from. And so the library shelves that remained, they did have books on them, but it would be like 25 copies of the titles that the person could get from First Book, which is something. And thank you very much for that. In the new system, we don't have 10 copies of anything. Inside those books are still book pockets. The library was full of a lot of that. But while I was churning the ship, which I was hired to do, I took that time to see if the teachers wanted any of that stuff first and then edit the space down, because I was down all of those other rooms that a 1980s library relied on. When I was hired, one of the things that the administration made very clear was that not only was I supposed to have enough classroom space carved out of the remaining room, but that space also had to be big enough to have faculty meetings, which, okay, the faculty is about 50. The student classes are about 32. If you count all the couches and the things that come in a new library, it's sort of the same. But that all comes out of book space room, because lots of people are flipping that computer lab in a 1980s library to be that's where you teach your class so that the library can be open for passes. So I am still trying to navigate how am I going to be the computer person when I have a 2-hour para? How am I going to teach lessons if I am the computer person because I have a 2-hour para? How can I deal with the equity of a hall pass system if I have to be the computer person and teaching lessons and I have a 2-hour para? That is what I was illustrating this year. And that caused some frustration on everybody's part. But the library world is different now than 14 years ago, when even the person who would have used the library the most was last seeing a library in the building. The whole world has changed. Not unlike that pen on the spine labels, but now we have printers. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And I think this is where the vision that the librarian has, you recognize that you're going to always have short-term goals and long-term goals. And you're going to have, the whole Rome wasn't built in a day, realization that, there are certain things that take time. There are certain things that take money. And oftentimes changing the understanding of what we do that does take time. And part of this is winning over the support of your teachers. Some of this is convincing your administration of the value that the space has when you have the opportunity to use it in a way that best supports the school.
Yes. And again, I listen faithfully to your podcast because I'm still actively learning. You spend a lot of time with your guests talking about planning and talking about advocating to your administrators. And so I try to do that. And in your last episode from here, and I don't know that person's name, they said you have to network with those that are willing. You have to teach to those that are willing.
Work with the willing.
There you go.
work with the willing. And I think that was Carrie Friday. Carrie Friday said, work with the willing. And that's you. I'm convinced that we are on campaigns. We are absolutely methodical. We are no different from the politicians who have these, they wage these 18-month campaigns to get elected. I have been waging a campaign from the moment I stepped foot in that space, and I'm trying to size up where my allies are. I am trying to see where where are the lines in the sand? Where did the administration draw the line when it comes to the things that they are willing to see me and support me on, and where are some things which really are non-negotiables? And it's up to us to be able to navigate this without alienating anybody. And work with the willing means that whatever inroads I can make with my staff is huge, because I'll tell you what, when the question was whether or not we were going to have databases, ultimately the administration listened to the teachers. When I had said I need funding for databases, I couldn't move the needle. I really couldn't. I'm just going to be very blunt. And it took more than a couple teachers being incredibly vociferous and going to administration and saying, now see here, we need X, Y, Z because we cannot fulfill these expectations that have been placed on us. We are an IB school. And so all of a sudden, you're not going to believe this. We got our databases funded. And I was, again, working with the willing, going to the people who ultimately I have my teachers to thank for that. Does that make me feel frustrated? No, it makes me feel supported, because at the end of the day, we have to have the support of our teachers in order for the administration to appreciate that what we do has value. They may not see it every day, but our teachers sure do. And I'll tell you, it has been a campaign, and finishing my second year in my building, it is still a campaign. I'm not done because I haven't, achieved the kinds of big things that I hope to. And it's only through that really just systematic way of working through the goals that you've set for your space, but recognizing that your teachers are going to be part of that solution.
Yes. I also view everything as a big campaign.
So tell me, I'm guessing, and this is similar to the space I inherited, you were facing the immediate realization that there probably wasn't quite the culture of reading that you were hoping that would be in a school, in a library space. If you have an ancient collection and one that hasn't been circulated in years, it's a little hard to have that sort of larger culture of reading in the building. So could you give us some ideas of what were some things that you've been doing over the past, you and I are in our spaces now. We're finishing up our second year. What are some things that have worked well with your building in building that culture of reading?
First, while I start this discussion, I'm going to pull up my big infographic, my end of the year infographic, because I have really good news. We went from 9,000 and some odd checkouts last year to 11,980 checkouts this year. So first of all, I had to announce that we have checked out more books. So that is excellent. One thing that I really try to do is to wander around and talk to the kids about the books. I try and put front-facing books on the top of every genre to help illustrate what the genres are. I have the running slides of what I'm reading, but also I bought a ton of graphics. I tell the kids all the time, we have 1,168 plus one graphics in our library. And that's not individual Dogman copies. That's titles, which we understand, but the kids don't understand that. I have a graphic section, but unlike everybody else everybody else is probably not the right phrase. Unlike many librarians who have an entire graphic novel section, everything that's graphic goes there. If you have 1,169 titles and you dump them all together, either you have made yourself a second library, which I only have one room, or you now have this giant dumping ground that still nobody can shop. So if the graphic novel has a regular novel, then I take the graphic and I put it with the regular novels. For instance, Wings of Fire, they have graphics. So the Wings of Fire graphic sits in the fantasy section right in front of the copy that's in regular words. This is a tiny bit of a problem because the kids go to the graphic section thinking everything that's graphic is there. But as they learn how to use the catalog, which was a new adventure, they realize that we do have these things and the catalog has sublocations. And so it doesn't say go to graphic, it goes to fantasy. And as I'm communicating with them, it all works out in the end. I have things like the graphic Hobbit, graphic nonfiction. I have tons of graphics. And that is a little bit because of our language learner population. The more that they have the pictures, the more supported that they are. But everybody likes graphics to a certain degree.
You know, I think the ones that stood out in my memory was, I think Coraline has a graphic novel as well as Wrinkle in Time and what is it called? The Graveyard book? Yeah, the Graveyard book, Neil Gaiman's Graveyard book actually is 2 parts. Yes. And so I remember that. But, you know, I think it's very clever because what you're doing is using graphic novels to encourage kids to read fiction. And all of a sudden it's that gateway. It's like, if I can read this and I've got the story and I understand it now, I'm going to be able to read the book possibly with some confidence because they have a general understanding of the story, having read. And we do that also with our Shakespeare. We have our manga Shakespeare at the high school. And so the kids can read the Shakespeare manga version. And then, and we do have some pairing those up.
I have those too. I did not pull manga out because the manga readers are very specific. They stay really right there. So manga Hamlet, it does live in manga. It breaks that rule. But in my nonfiction, I also have a graphic pared down version of Hamlet, and it sits in 811. Isn't that where it's supposed to sit? 817, 8 something. It sits over there where it's supposed to. So when I have a reader who I notice is going all the way through a graphic novel thing like Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. Okay, so I see that you like reading wars in graphic. This is a really good series. Then I move them over by asking them, so what if I could give you more war still in graphic? I'm not trying to take you out of graphic. Graphic is perfectly fine. But what if I could show you different graphics? And we walk over to the 900s and I have the Twin Towers. There's a book in graphic. I have a World War II and a World War I in graphic. And I'm sure that there's more, but those are the ones I sell the most. And then in biographies, I have graphics. So if you're reading sports fiction or the football series is, in my school, it's the soccer series, I can find you those guys in a graphic biography. In my reader's advisory, I try and show them, look, there's more out here. And sometimes they stick.
Yeah, and this is about, again, it is an opportunity to invite your students, encourage your students to see the larger collection and thematically, how their interest in reading graphic novels can also be expanded to the larger collection of the library. I know librarians make that decision based on what best serves their students' needs. When it comes to, I don't want to let you go before I ask you about your CTE program, because you did something really clever, which I love about signage. And I'm thinking, I'm very lucky because in my high school, we have a CTE program. So friends, just for clarification, because I'll tell you at the elementary level, I wasn't aware what CTE programs were, but career technical education is something which many schools incorporate to build out the offerings for our students. And the wonderful thing about CTE programs is they often come with funding. And you're talking about money coming in consistently, regardless of your student enrollment. This is CTE funds. Do not mess with this. But I'll tell you, one day I was having a great day. My students walked in and they had these big signs. And I said, hi. And they said, Mrs. Herman, we made these for you. It was a project we did in our CTE class. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, our teacher said you need nice signs about like when the Learning Commons is open and when the Learning Commons closes on each day. And so they didn't even ask. They just went ahead. They said, yeah, we did this for a project and here it is. And it was so kind of them because they had taken something. The teacher had said, hey, I noticed that the librarian doesn't have any signs. Maybe we should make her some. And it just made my day. But you did something, you had a really clever collaboration. I'd love for you to share with us. Tell us a little bit about it.
I'm very thankful for my CTE teacher. We share that pass-through door that used to be the periodical room. And I don't see him a whole ton, but he walks through my space sometimes to get to his room. And we collaborated on a graphic design project that he was having in his room. They were already learning a program. And I said, oh my goodness, wouldn't it be nice? See these signs out here? I made these in a minute and a half for each of the genres because I had to unpack the entire library this summer and I didn't have a lot of time. So they're up and they are clearly explaining what section you're in, but they are boring because I made them in 4 minutes. And could we get the kids to make cooler signs in your Illustrator program, which I do not remember what he was in. Oh, he's in Adobe Illustrator. That's what he was doing. I made a slideshow that explains what graphic design entry-level concept would have been and the wayfinding signage. We went into a little bit more detail. And then I invited them, just make sure that your fonts are the same, make sure that your colors match the room, make sure that they are consistent through the entire project, and then harken back to what ELA had for all of your genres and make sure that the image that you choose matches the genre that you're in. I made a rubric. We went on a tour. Not all of the kids listen, so they didn't all catch the parts that were in there. So there was some Googling, and it was evident who could meet that threshold for the ELA standard and who could not. Now, I didn't assign any grades, but my library helpers and we were scoring which ones most expressed the genre and which ones we liked the most. And there were a couple of tricks. I keep my superhero books because, again, I have too many graphics. I keep my superhero books in adventure. So it's called adventure and superhero. So if all you put up there is Spider-Man, while you may have effectively explained superhero, you do not capture the fact that that's also where Hatchet lives. So there was a trick there. And also the historical fiction section, which in my library, a little bit so I don't have to rebuild it, everything before the Twin Towers, up to and including the Twin Towers, is in historical, even though the math isn't exactly right, because those guys they don't have any time frame. My middle schoolers were not even alive then.
Well, I love that this is such an authentic opportunity for our CTE students to really become invested in something which they're going to get to see every day in the library. I mean, that's authentic. I almost wish you could take all their ideas and rotate them. I realize it's not a possibility, yes, but I think all of a sudden when you create something, I know for the students who created, the CTE students who created my signage, I was just delighted. And you better believe those are up there and on full display. And now I'm thinking, I think there's more signage I think they need to help me make. And by the way, it's paid for with CTE funds. When I consider the amount of money I could have spent on signage, and like many librarians, I resorted in many times making my own signage. But I love the idea of putting this on the students and having them make the signage. That's genius.
It was great. They presented to the library helpers and myself. And the library helpers loved being employees at that moment, sitting there with a clipboard and the pencils like a teacher. The presentations were great. That was the bulk of the scored part, the CTE teacher said. And then we took the winners from each one of the periods, so 5 periods. The CTE teacher did a really quick slideshow of each one of them, put them into a Google form, released that to advisory, and then the entire student body who clicked to open the form voted on which one was the coolest. And my library helpers and I waited with bated breath because we knew who we liked the most for adventure and superhero. And we were very afraid that the school was not going to pick that one. And in the end, the school picked the same one that we picked. And I printed all the signs off and realized that the CTE teacher and I had forgotten to have the artists sign their work. There was no watermark. There was no nothing. So that was a wonderful lesson in copyright. I brought the artist over and handed them a Sharpie and said, please, would you sign them all? Because if I put these up, that would be me saying that I did this work and I did not. And I need to give you credit for this work. But worse, if I put these on the copier, that would be an even bigger copyright infringement. So would you please sign all of these for me? And now, forevermore, I'm sure her citations will be lovely because now she has a personal copyright lesson under her belt. And they look great.
And I'm thinking I'm going to utilize student artists when I start putting out my collection. In my library reconfiguration, my predecessor, a great deal of our shelving, our heavy wood bookshelves were eliminated. And many people say, well, where are you going to put all these books when they come in? Because I received a lovely grant. And I said, that's not going to be a problem. And I just tell them, don't worry about it. I got this. And I'll tell you what, I've got a bunch of book carts, and I could easily entice some of our artists to create the signage that we would be putting onto the carts to broadcast what kinds of books those are. These are, relationship and identity. These are mystery books we're featuring? These are, fantasy or sci-fi or dystopian books? And doing that because I want to give the students' art a chance to shine. And that's a really exciting thing. I have to ask you, because you included this in our show notes, you have an axolotl? How did that happen?
The principal asked me that as well. So we already had salmon, which I talked about in November. And since I already had demonstrated that I could keep the tank clean and that I could make aquarium stuff fall from the sky, when someone offered me a free axolotl, I said, sure. The kids, like I said in the beginning, 95% of the families identify as Hispanic. Therefore, axolotls are very relevant to them. Then when you factor in Minecraft, everybody already knew what an axolotl was. So we started talking about how the axolotl was going to come live with us in about November. But he was so tiny that I couldn't trust him with the stress of living in a middle school. So he didn't move in with us until after Christmas break. So in January, when they came back, poof, axolotl. And we if anybody has ever tried to find a book on axolotls, that is incredibly difficult. We do have one nonfiction book that has a picture, one singular picture of an axolotl, because they're a kind of salamander. And one thing very relevant to middle school is that axolotls stay in this middle zone. They never fully mature unless, somehow their environment is not conducive to them. And then they'll finish up so that they can get out of their environment. So I explain it to the kids that he's stuck in middle school, because in middle school, you are in the middle. You are not an elementary schooler. You are not even a high schooler, let alone an adult. You are in that middle zone. And the axolotl is forever going to be a middle schooler, but we have to be nice to him. And they are very nice to him. He is pretty much a wet therapy dog. Lots of axolotls, I hear, are social, but I'm not sure that they're as social as this one, because he loves the kids. He misses the kids when he has to come back home on a break with me since he's gone there. He's currently upstairs swimming around and hoping that someone's going to come and read to him, and nobody will, because they're at school.
Got it. I love this because I know library pets. There's always some concern about how those library pets are going to do, especially now that we're going into the summer months. So the axolotl is going to summer with you. Sam Carterby, I'm so grateful you shared everything with us today. I will say, listeners, Sam has also told me that she's not on social media. And we're going to respect that. I will say I'm always grateful when you and I cross paths. And friends, if you had any follow-up questions for Sam, you are more than welcome to reach out to me, and I will forward those questions to Sam. But Sam, I hope you have some wonderful plans for the summer coming up.
Thanks, and I hope that you have a great summer too.
Absolutely. Take care. I am absolutely inspired when I hear about school librarians who have taken on pretty incredible challenges, like opening the door to a room which hasn't been used as a school library for years and transforming it into the library that it is today. And whether you're taking on small challenges or big challenges, hearing other librarians go through similar types of obstacles and finding strategies that work for them might work for you. So I'm glad you tuned in today. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. Because, friends, we are going to be recording throughout the summer. My goal is to post an episode every week. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. Couple friendly reminders, friends. Use the code UNITED to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more, and schedule your first Literati Book Fair by July 31st for this fall 2023 and receive a $500 Titlewave gift card. As always, there are links in the show notes. The topic of our next episode will be ChatGPT and my conversation with Dr. Christopher Harris. I hope you will tune in.